I was hoping that I wouldn't have to say it. We are doing a little short series in Haggai. We were in a nice breaking point in the book of Proverbs. Until this year, I don't think I realized that there were breaking points in the book of Proverbs, but there are. And then I had a couple weeks that I wanted to fill, and then we'll go right into Advent here in a couple weeks. So I went looking for a little short book of the Bible that we hadn't talked about before, and came up with this one. It is used most often to talk about building programs. So ushers, would you please come forward? Preachers dig it out for sermons because for building programs because they want, it's talking about building the temple and why aren't we doing well? Because we haven't built a nice church. And so they dig it out for that. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the election. That happened 2,500 years ago. They didn't really have elections, but in Haggai's world, their world was in turmoil. They had just had a major shift. The previous king of the Persian Empire had been overthrown, done in, and the next king had come in, and they were terribly worried about what was going on. Their political scene had just gone through this enormous change, and they weren't sure how this would all work out. There were economic problems. Their taxes were being threatened to go up. They weren't taxing the rich enough. No, that's just my own opinion. They had problems with trade in the empire because the empire was unsettled, and so they were having economic hardships. They were having political unrest. The people on the left coast, the Egyptians, had decided that they wanted to secede, and so they were starting this Facebook campaign where you could like secession, and then the Persians would do something about that eventually. That was actually going on. The Egyptians were talking about trying to leave the Persian Empire. And so there was all this political unrest that was going on. And there was a poor harvest. The land had not produced, the rains had not come, and they were in a severe drought. Sounds familiar. Sounds real familiar. And Haggai's message to them was, get your priorities right. Focus on what God says is important, and do that, and everything else will fall into place. It was also the first day of the month, and it was the time for the new moon sacrifices. This was a big deal in their day. They had 12 of these a year, obviously, and they would come together and have a feast. In fact, Haggai's name means feast. His rap name was Party Animal. But it meant festival, it meant feast. And he was saying, hey, let's rebuild the temple so that we can feast, so that we can celebrate our new moon festivals, so that we can celebrate the Passover, so that we can celebrate all of these feasts of Israel, so that we can party, so that we can be happy, so that we can have the security that the Lord brings. And he wants them to rebuild the temple. The temple project had begun 15 years earlier, or about that long, and had never really gotten very far. They had started it, and then it just kind of fizzled out because they got involved in other things. They got involved in taking care of their homes. They got involved in their fields. They got involved with their city. They got involved with other things. Zerubbabel and Joshua were the leaders of the kingdom, and Haggai addresses them. Zerubbabel was the descendant of David, and they looked to him to be the next king to lead them in their world. Joshua was the high priest, the grandson of Zadok, a very famous high priest. And he was supposed to lead the people spiritually. And together, Haggai addresses them and says, listen, these people have just not done what I want them to do. The word of the Lord came through Haggai. I forgot to put quotations and marks around that. But that phrase seems to me to highlight the idea that God is speaking through Haggai. It's not just Haggai talking, it's God talking through them. And it also emphasizes the fact that he comes in a long line of prophets. There have been people who've been doing this for years, calling the people back. He's not doing something entirely new. He says that the Lord of hosts, the Lord Almighty, is the one who addresses them and wants to speak to them. This word comes from military terms. It's a Lord of armies. And God is saying, listen, I have all the power here. I can help you here if you only follow after me. But they're saying, and their phrase going around their blogs was, the time has not yet come for the Lord's temple to be rebuilt. It's not his time yet. We'll get to it, but it's just not time for that to happen yet. And they were spreading that all over the place. And Haggai says, this is your problem. You have said that the Lord's house is not time for it yet. But that's supposed to be what they're there for. The people may have been waiting for a messianic figure. They may have been waiting for Zerubbabel to do something spectacularly Davidic. Or they may have just been wondering, well, maybe the Persians are going to come, or they're going to destroy us anyway. Maybe we don't want to invest all of this money in this temple, so maybe we should just back off a little bit on this temple thing. For whatever reason, Haggai contrasts the houses that they have built with the house that they haven't built for God. And so he starts talking about their houses. While the temple is in ruins, is still unbuilt, they're living in nicely decorated homes, paneled homes. You know, they've got them all finished off, and they are just good. The word house ties us back, not only the houses that they were living in and the house of God that the temple was, but it ties back to 2 Samuel 7, where God promised David a house that became the temple, but a house that was also a dynasty and a house that would produce the Messiah. This was David's house that he was going to have. And so he links those back to them and says, you need to have the same priorities in your life that David and Solomon did. Looking forward to the Messiah, worshiping God, putting God on the front burner, just like the deacons are doing with your casseroles right now. I have food on my mind. And he says, give careful thought to your ways. He is asking them to think about what's going on here. They have planted but not harvested. They have eaten but are still hungry. They have drunk but are still thirsty. They are clothed but they're still cold. And they've put money in their money bags, but their money bags have holes in them and they don't know where the money went. But they have not made the connection between these two, between what God has been saying and what they're doing. They haven't made the connection between building the temple and what their nicely decorated houses and not putting God first. They haven't made that connection yet. But Haggai was going to draw that connection for them. And so he says to do three things. He says, go up and bring down and build. Go up and praise the Lord, bring down timbers from the mountains and build the temple of God. The reasons that he says to do this tell us the priorities that we're supposed to have. Because God will take pleasure and because God will be honored. They weren't supposed to do this so that they would have a wonderful harvest. They weren't supposed to do this so that the Persians would stop messing around with their politics and settle down. They were supposed to do this so that God would be praised. That is our chief object in life. And if we do that, everything else falls into place. The purpose of rebuilding transcends the benefit to them. Goes way beyond what any expectation they would have. Yes, they will get food. Yes, they will be drink and not be thirsty anymore. Yes, they will have all of these things. But first, they have to put God first. They have to make God their priority. The two issues mentioned in Haggai 1, 2 through 7 are linked now directly. It says, why is our life so poor? Why haven't we gotten good harvests? Why haven't we been blessed? It's because God is not honored. When we honor God, everything else falls into place. Does that mean that your life is going to be perfect? Not hardly. Not hardly. But God will be there. And this is what he talks about here in a few sentences. When he says, I will be with you through everything, and you will have a great life. The disappointing yields can be directly linked to the discipline that God is sending them. In their day, they were living under the old covenant, and the covenant said, if you obey me, I will send rain.